Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through a list of some new fantasy works that have been standouts for me over the last 6 months. I did go over some standouts from the first 3 months. The reason that we're doing 6 months this time around is after the second quarter of the year, I just was finding that I didn't really have a top 5 for new fantasy releases, and it just would have felt disingenuous to make a video of a top 5 when a lot of my feelings weren't necessarily that I was disappointed, more so that I just wasn't wowed by a lot of what I was picking up. And thus, that is why we are getting books from the last 6 months that I've picked up. If you're interested in seeing non-new fantasy works, or if you're interested in seeing some self-pub wrap-ups or things like that, I'll have those in the description bar down below, as I do like to sort of dedicate time to backlist and self-pub. And then also, if you're looking for more in-depth reviews for anything I talk about today, or just in general any of the new fantasy I've discussed this year, I'll have those in the description bar as well. But jumping into it, I'm going to start with some honorable mentions. I do like to try and do at least a top 5 when I do these, but I just found that I had 4 that were standouts, and then these other 2, I don't know that I wanted to put them in the same place as the standouts, but I did still want to at least mention them. So they're kind of tied for 5th place / their honorable mentions. The first one, now that I'm done over-explaining, would be Spin of Fate. I thought that this book was so unique, and I would say I have picked up primarily adult fantasy over the last few years, and it was just nice to pick up a young adult story that felt like it was really making the adult fantasy kind of have a run for its money when it comes to the world building, because the world building in this was really fascinating, not just in the more obvious, like literally the world itself sort of way and the setting, but also the magic system and how all of that affects the main characters' day-to-day lives, their sort of code of morality, and how they view other people within all of that. I really thought that that was exceptionally well done. The setup for this one is that you follow this young girl who was born in this lower realm, and the realms are divided almost like spiritual realms, except for your physical body can ascend as well. And I say spiritual though because it's almost like you've been taught that you are in certain realms depending on how pure your soul is to an extent. And our main character, as somebody who's been born into the lower realm, doesn't understand how somebody who is a child and never done anything wrong can, from a almost religious standpoint, be seen as worthy of a lesser existence. But one day something happens to her and her mother, and she ends up, our main character, ascending to a higher realm, but her mother does not. And then sort of in a twist of fate, you find that our main character now wants to return to the lower realm so that she can get back to her mother. Then from there, you do join with some other perspectives. One is a character who is from the lower realm, one who is from the realm that our character ascended into, and they are sort of grappling with and trying to dissect everything they've been taught throughout the sort of journey that they go on together. I just really thought it was really unique, really different. I feel that this one had so many comp titles thrown around, and that none of the comp titles really felt fitting, and that's because I think this book is so unique and it really stands on its own. I am definitely interested in picking up the sequel when it eventually comes around. I think the reason it's not maybe a standout and it's an honorable mention is just because I don't know that I really fell in love with it just yet. I do feel like we had to establish so much within this first book, and it was established really well. And I do like the characters. I feel like they all felt realistic, and they do take certain character archetypes and they sort of do a twist on those things, which I really enjoyed. But I wouldn't say I loved any character. I don't know that I was exceptionally emotional at any points. So for that reason, it's not necessarily in the top, but I still really enjoyed this one, and I'll be curious to see where the series goes. Speaking of series and where they go, the other honorable mention would be Sunbringer. Many of you know I loved God Killer when I picked it up, and I did quite enjoy Sunbringer. I do think that Sunbringer sort of just carried the story forward, which is what you would want from a middle book. I don't by any means think it lessened it. It didn't ruin the series for me or anything, but I also don't think that I came away from it thinking like, wow, that's how you write a sequel necessarily. I think a good example of a series that for me did this exceptionally well is something like The Aurelian Cycle. The second book in that trilogy is actually my favorite, I think, of the trilogy. I really feel like it expanded on everything and made everything even better. And then another would be the Mistborn trilogy. The second book, The Well of Ascension, once again, I think is my favorite book in that trilogy. I don't need to give you so many examples because it's not that relevant, but since I started the sentence, the First Law trilogy, once again, second book, my favorite. This is just one where I think it has maybe a little bit of middle book syndrome. It carries us out of the second one. We're looking at our cast of characters and what's transpiring with them. In a lot of ways, you really want their plot lines to intersect again. And it is very action-packed. It does move forward quite a bit, quite quickly in a good way. And I do think that the author really knows how to capture your attention and write a scene. But I do feel like my emotional investment maybe, and also my being so intrigued by the world and the lore, it just wasn't quite there in the same way in the second book. But again, I don't want it to come across like, oh, I was so disappointed, I hated that second book, because that wasn't my feeling at all. I do look forward to seeing the third and final book in this trilogy. Now getting into my top 4, as the other 2, as I already said multiple times, I don't know why I'm repeating this, are basically tied for 5th. Anyway, these are in no particular order, so it's not like I'm going from the 4th place up to the 1st place. I'm just going to mention them. And because these are books that I have pulled from over the last 6 months, you probably have heard me talk about them, so I'm going to maybe not go as in depth. But the first one would be Foul Days, and the sequel is officially out now, and I very much look forward to jumping into it and finishing up this duology. So the first book, though, Foul Days, follows this young woman who is a witch, and she is living within this particular city known as Chernigrad. This city has monsters within it, and it is really bad within the first 12 days of the year, which are known as the Foul Days, when the veil between the worlds has weakened and the monsters can come through. And Kasara is somebody who doesn't just have magic, but also has a full range of knowledge when it comes to different kinds of monsters. She is relatively capable. However, the Czar of Monsters is somebody that she knows is after her, and this particular individual is exceptionally powerful. So this person, right at the beginning of the 12 days, comes looking for her, and she, in an effort to get away from him, bargains away her shadow, which is the source of a witch's powers. And in doing this, she, 1, no longer has her powers, and 2, she ends up starting to have what is known as the shadow sickness, which means that she eventually herself will become a shadow. But the reason that she was so desperate and willing to do this is because in trading away her shadow, it allowed her to get safety on the other side of a wall that separates Chernigrad from this other city where monsters cannot get through as a result of the wall. And then once she gets to this other side of the city, there is sort of a eyes being open to what the world actually looks like. And there's almost a murder mystery detective plotline in a sense within the story as well. It kind of seems like it's a lot of things all at once, and it kind of is, but I had so much fun with it. It's a little cheeky at times, which I thought was quite entertaining, and I really enjoyed the Eastern European folklore inspirations within this. I'm sure you're going to recognize, many of you are also huge fantasy fans, especially if you're a fan of something like Witcher. You're going to have seen some of these monsters before, and if you like a lot of Eastern European folklore-inspired fantasy stories, I'm sure there are going to be things in this that you're like, oh, I recognize that, which was fun. I don't by any means think it fits into retelling territory at all. It's very much its own story, but it has these sprinkles of familiarity within it, and I had a blast with it. I thought it was a great time. After that, we have A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. This is now up there among my favorites by this author. Previously, Nettle and Bone was up there. This one is up there now as well. It's such a great hybrid of both fantasy and horror. It really is exceptionally edge of your seat, and I think what it does with the concept of high stakes is fantastic. So a lot of us, I think, when we imagine high stakes, we imagine more epic settings, but the stakes in this were as high as they could be for the characters that you're following. So their main perspectives, you have 2 within this. You have one who is a young girl who is being abused by her mother, who is a sorceress, but the rest of the population does not know this about her. And then the other perspective is a woman named Hester, whose brother is interested in the sorceress. Hester is very much suspicious of the sorceress. She, again, doesn't know that the woman is a sorceress, and as a result of not knowing, you as the reader, you are very fearful for all the people that kind of stand in her way. And when I say stand in her way, I mean, like, they will say the subtlest of jabs, and you're just like kind of satisfied by it, but also you're really fearful of like, oh my gosh, what's going to set off the sorceress? And you know how dangerous things are because the sorceress's daughter, who is Coraline, one of the main perspectives, you have seen the way that her mother has utilized magic in front of her and against her, so you know what can be done. And then you also hear about things in the background and you're realizing like, oh, she was responsible for that. So you are very on the edge of your seat throughout the entirety of the story. I do also think that the commentary on being a child and having an abusive parental figure or just parent is really well done. And I always, Luna has opinions. And then of course, being T. Kingfisher, there is also a good amount of humor in the story as well. So it's just a great hybrid and blend of so many things, and I think it was so well done. Really, really enjoyed this one. After that, we have the Spellshop. This was absolutely darling. If you're a fan of cozy fantasy, then I think that's all you need to hear, is that this is a great example of cozy fantasy, and I think that it did something that I am so glad for, which is that it really ensured that even though the world building isn't the most expansive, as the setting isn't necessarily huge, you do get really interesting, vibrant, colorful world building, and I think Sarah Beth Durst is exceptional as an author when it comes to writing settings. I've read a number of her works at this point, and she always delivers on that front. I think that's true of the Spellshop as well. And then alongside that, you have just all the coziness. There is a sense of kind of learning to trust other people, and if you are somebody who is very introverted or you have social anxiety, I think you're going to really resonate with the main character. The setup is that you follow the main perspective and her sentient spider plant. At the beginning of the story, there is a rebellion occurring, and it seems a lot of the city is being set on fire, and she, as somebody who is a librarian within this library that has so much knowledge within it, she realizes, oh my gosh, I have to try to save some of these books. And she does, and then she flees to her, what I'm going to call like her hometown. It's very small. But she realizes if the rebellion isn't successful, that the previous government, they have very strict rules on the books that can be taken out of the library, as the knowledge within those books can be very dangerous in other people's hands, as it does kind of hold the secrets to magic. So our main character realizes, oh my gosh, I can be in so much trouble. There have been examples that she has seen throughout her life of what happens to other people who take the books out of the library when they're not supposed to. But because she's in a small town, even though she's trying to sort of keep her arrival very quiet, people, of course, are kind of like, well, hey, how are you? What are you doing here? And they kind of get in her business, trying to be friendly. Maybe some of them aren't the friendliest, some of them are just nosy, but she's kind of like, oh, hi, and she's just trying to get by, and because pretty much of the small town vibe, inevitably she ends up having to sort of interact with other people, and then she's realizing maybe some of the problems within this town can be solved with some of the knowledge that's within the books. It's very cute, it's very wholesome, it was a lot of fun, and I don't know necessarily if this is going to be categorized as a standalone or if it'll be a series of standalones, as it has been announced that there will be another book. I don't think that the next one's a direct sequel, but I can let you know that you definitely can read the Spellshop as a standalone because the world was so well done. I'm excited regardless of what the next book entails, whether it's completely different characters or continuation. I'm very excited to see what we get with that next one. And then last for today, we have the Fireborne Blade. This has come up in so many videos, so you've probably heard about this one already, but the setup is that you follow this disgraced knight who, in an effort to gain back some of their status, they decide they're going to descend into a dragon's lair and try to steal the Fireborne Blade. This is a very dangerous quest, and similar to what I was saying about A Sorceress Comes to Call, this particular novella, I think it's technically considered because it's quite short, it ends up having such a great blend of genres. So in my opinion, it's a mix of fantasy and psychological horror, which I really liked, as when the character is descending into the dragon's lair, their sense of reality is definitely being affected, I'll say. So I don't want to say too much other than that. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really creative, and I thought it took something very familiar in fantasy and kind of one of the core things that fantasy has been built upon, which is sort of dragon slaying fantasy, it took that and did something really different with it, which I really appreciated. But anyway, that's it for some of my favorite new fantasy releases over the last 6-ish months. As I said before, I will have links to all of these and all of the other new fantasy releases, wrap-ups, and other things in the description bar down below. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.